welcome back to Rima Reads. So today I'm gonna go through my 2020 stats for books I read. I'm gonna go through like Goodreads and Storygraphs plus some stats that I found on my own as well. So if you like end of year stats, please keep watching. So this year I read 50 books. I know that's probably not a lot in terms of like booktuber number of books they read, but like that's a lot for me. My goal was 35 books this year. So I surpassed my goal by a lot. And I also only counted books that were like first time reads, not rereads in the stats. So I think the actual number of books I read is much higher because I didn't count like my Stormlight Archive reread or my Lunar Chronicles reread that I did earlier in this year. So 50 books is what I kept track of, and I read 50 new books this year, and I'm very, very happy about that. So from that 50 books, I read 20,907 pages, and both my longest and my shortest book were Brandon Sanderson books. My longest book was Rhythm of War, Brandon Sanderson, which was at 1,212 pages. And my shortest book was also by Brandon Sanderson, and it's called Defending Asylum at 43 pages. It's one of those like books on his website, short stories on his website that I read. So 2 Brandon Sanderson books for both longest and shortest. My average book length was 418 pages. The most popular book I read this year was Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard, which had over 1 million people shelf it on Goodreads, which is wild, but that's probably why I read this book, because it was so popular and I knew it was beloved, even though I didn't think it was that good. The least popular book I read this year is Fear the Wolf by Andrew Butcher, with only 237 people have read it, and it was one of the first books I read this year. My average rating, according to Goodreads, is 3.9 stars, which seems about accurate because I do tend to rate my books fairly highly. Average around 4 stars per book, so seems about right. And the highest rated book on Goodreads that I read this year was, again, Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson, with a whopping 4.72 rating on Goodreads, and I rated it 5 stars, so like, I'm not surprised there. Now we're gonna jump over to some Storygraph stats, because I really like that Storygraph has those nice graphs in them. Storygraph also has the pages different than what I said for Goodreads, so again, this has 50 books, but it says I read 21,315 pages, so I guess it depends on the edition. I didn't keep track of like how many pages my editions had, but you know, I like this one because it says I read more pages, so we'll go with the Storygraph version. And according to Storygraph, the mood that I read the most of is adventurous, which I guess is fair because I read a lot of fantasy, and fantasy tends to be adventurous. Apparently, I also read a lot of mysterious and dark books, with 19 books I read this year falling under the mysterious category, and 13 books I read falling under the dark category, which is slightly more surprising because, like, I don't read dark books very much, but I guess I do. I guess I read a lot of dark books. I have a good even split on the pacing of the books that I read, where I read 14 books that were slow-paced, 19 books that were medium-paced, and 16 books that were fast-paced. So a nice split in between those. For fiction versus nonfiction, I read, that math doesn't add up. For fiction versus nonfiction, 46 of the books I read this year were fiction, and only 4 books I read this year were nonfiction, which is very, very low ratio, but I do love fiction. And now let's go into the genre breakdown. So for genres, I read 41 books that were fantasy. Yeah, I read a lot of fantasy. The majority of the books I read this year were fantasy. Out of the 50 books I read this year, 23 of them were young adult. None of them were middle grade or children's books. I need to read a bit more of those going forward. And then the remaining of them were adult fantasy. So I have a pretty good even split between young adult and adult books. According to Storygraph, only 9 of my books were LGBTQIA+, but that number seems a bit low to me. I think that's like based on what's tagged as LGBTQIA books in Storygraph. but I definitely feel like I read a lot more books that fall under that radar. So I'll do some of my own stats after this. And I only read 7 sci-fi books this year, so that's another category I kind of want to focus on next year. 41 fantasy books, 7 sci-fi books. I think some of the books overlap in the categories according to Storygraph, but in general, I do want to try and read more sci-fi. Looking at the books and the number of pages I read, Graph definitely read the most in the month of December with the 13 books I read, which was the bulk majority of my reading this year. Otherwise, I seem to have like averaged around 4-ish books a month before December. Like I mentioned, I didn't count rereads in any of this, and so I think if I did count rereads, November would be much higher in terms of page count because I did reread the entire Stormlight Archive, which probably honestly had more pages than the 13 books I read in December. So I did my own count of books that either had a main character or an important side character who are LGBTQIA+, and out of that I counted 17 out of the 50 books I read to include that, and so I'm fairly happy with that. I think that's a good number, and I'd love to keep that up in 2021. In terms of disability representation, for this I'm counting mostly physical disabilities, not mental disabilities, because I could probably make a case for a lot of characters in a book. They all have like PTSD, but it's not as explicit in books about whether or not they're giving representation to mental illness. But physical disabilities is something that you don't see a lot of in the fantasy genre. And so this year I did read 3 books that did have disability rep, but I could definitely do better in that stat. So in terms of authors, I read 15 books written by POC authors out of the 50. I was kind of surprised how low that number was. I just kind of assumed I read a lot more POC authors. I mean, I think that's still fairly decent, but 15 out of 50 could be better. But it's not bad. So for female authors, I read 38 out of 50 female authors, which is not surprising to me because I read a lot of books by female authors. Part of it is because I read a lot of YA, and YA is generally dominated by female authors, and part of it is just I tend to be more drawn to stories by female authors, mostly because I can find that they write female characters better. Yeah. But there are some good male authors that do know how to write females. 38 out of 50 is great for females, and that means I read 12 out of 50 books by male authors, which I'm not mad about. So those are my diversity stats, and next I wanted to go through the books and what stars I gave them. I didn't give any books this year 1 star. I generally don't really read many 1-star books because I end up DNFing them, and I try and only pick up books I know I'm gonna like, so usually a 1-star book would be like something that I hate that doesn't appeal to me at all, so I don't even know why I would pick up a 1-star book. Read no 1-star books this year. I only read 1 2-star book, and that was A Children of Virtue and Vengeance by Tomi Adeyemi. What a disappointment. Yeah. So after that, I didn't read any books 2.5 stars, so the next one is 3, and I rated 12 books 3 stars. So 3 stars are books that I enjoyed. I thought they were okay, kind of average. Average leaning toward like. 3.5 star books are like, oh, I liked these. I rated 20 books 4 stars. As you guys can see, I rate a lot of books 4 stars. And these are books that I genuinely enjoyed and liked a lot. I just wasn't in the I love them category. Next is my 4.5 star books. And I rated 5 books this year at 4.5 stars, which means they were just like this close to my perfect books. I really liked them a lot. They just weren't like my faves. But I did really love them. And finally, my 5-star reads for this year, and I have 9 of them, so close to achieving a perfect 10 5-star reads, but I have 9 of them. And some of these I kind of knew before I had started reading them that they would be 5-star reads, and some of them were complete surprises. One of those surprises was Foundryside and Shorefall, which I just adored. Some of the other books include The Adventure Zone Petals to the Metal, which I knew, of course, was going to be a 5-star read just because it's like my favorite podcast. Rhythm of War and Dawnshard were 5-star reads that were not surprising to me because, again, favorite series, so not surprising. The Stars Above, which is one of those Lunar Chronicle books, and it was just very cute. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue was another 5-star read for me because it was amazing. Braiding Sweetgrass was my favorite nonfiction book of the year and another 5-star read. It was a phenomenal read and I recommend it to everyone. It's so good. And then last book is The Empress of Salt and Fortune, which was a short novella, and it was just such a great novella. I really enjoyed it. So those were my 9 5-star reads. Let me know if you are interested in hearing book reviews for any of the books that I talked about. Some of them already have book reviews out. But yeah, overall, those are my 2020 stats, and I'm super happy with them. I'm very proud of the number of books I read. Let me know what you guys thought. What are your stats? And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Bye!